Please be advised, this episode does have content that some may find distressing. As always, listener discretion is advised and it is not suitable for anyone under the age of 13. Hello and welcome to episode 11 of It's Murder Up North, the true crime podcast that delves into the crimes that have occurred in the north of England, from the infamous to the obscure. So since I started this podcast, I've realised it is not as easy as it sounds. However, I've also discovered that the podcast community are more like one big family. They are so supportive towards each other. You may have noticed in my last few episodes, I've played the trailers for other podcasts. The creators of these shows have been so supportive and helpful, and I wanted to thank them by shouting about how great they are. Therefore, I want to introduce you to another amazing show, hosted and created by Jess and Matt. I love their show Skinwalker, which focuses mainly on Scottish crimes, and I definitely recommend you check it out.
Helen Puttock kisses her two children goodbye as she heads off to spend the night dancing at Glasgow's Barrowland Ballroom. Whilst there, she meets a young handsome man by the name of John. Throughout their conversation, John inexplicably quotes from the Bible. The following morning, Helen's body is discovered, strangled by the very stocking she had worn the night previous. The man responsible.
We are talking about one Bible John.
This is Bible John.
The so-called Bible John.
For this and other cases like it, I'm Jess, and this is Skinwalker. Search for Skinwalker True Crime on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Two coffins sat side by side. The celebrant addressed those gathered to pay their respects to the elderly couple. It was a short few-minute service, followed by the laying of a wreath at the couple's home. A home that most of the attendees at the funeral had never stepped foot inside. The truth was, no one really knew Patricia and William. And the 14 people who attended the funeral probably had more knowledge of their deaths than they did of their lives. Patricia was born in Fulham, in London, in 1935. She would have been one of the thousands of children evacuated from their homes during World War II. Many children from Fulham were sent to Cornwall to protect them from the bombing raids that blighted their cities. When these children returned, the world they knew would have changed completely. Whole streets had been destroyed, families had been torn apart, and so many had lost loved ones. Little is known about Patricia's childhood and the impact the war had on her life. In 1958, at the age of 23, Patricia discovered she was pregnant. When she died, no family members could be traced. At some point, her father had remarried and moved to Edgware in London. She must have had some contact with him and his new wife. She inherited money off her stepmother, who passed away in the 1970s. Perhaps one reason why no one came forward after Patricia's death was because she had been disowned by most of her family for having a child out of wedlock. It was while she was pregnant that she married 46-year-old William Wycherley. William was born in 1912 in Mansfield. The youngest of 4 children, he was the son of a coal miner. His childhood would have been formed under the turmoil of World War I, and he subsequently fought in the Second World War, serving in the Merchant Navy. People perceived him as being a straight-laced man with old-fashioned attitudes towards the roles of men and women. In 1959, the couple had their daughter Susan. She would be their only child and experienced an isolated upbringing with her reclusive parents. She had very few friends and little contact with extended family. Her father was strict, and he expected his wife and daughter to be obedient and dutiful. Upon leaving school, Susan got a job as a clerk, and in 1983, despite her father's disapproval, Susan married Christopher Edwards and promptly moved out of the family home. The couple moved into a rented top-floor council flat in Dagenham, East London. Like her parents, Susan didn't have any friends and found it difficult to form relationships. But when she met the accounts clerk through a dating agency, the couple found they had a special connection. They had similar interests, and over time, Christopher's work colleagues noticed that the once sociable man now devoted all his spare time to his wife, who didn't like him going out. The two of them became each other's world. William's attitude towards the roles of men and women must have had a deep effect on Susan's psyche, as once she was married, despite her being well educated and having worked previously, she devoted herself to being the dutiful housewife, just like her mother. The couple had fleeting contact with Susan's parents, and the relationship was an uneasy one. When Patricia's stepmother died, she left Susan £10,000, half of which she spent on a holiday to America with her mother. The two of them visited Memphis and the home of Elvis at Graceland. The remaining £5,000 Susan put towards helping her mum purchase her father and stepmother's house in Edgware. Susan's parents included her name on the deeds. However, in 1986, they persuaded her to sign over her share. Susan was furious when shortly after she signed over her share, her parents sold the house for a profit of £25,000, yet she was not given any money. William and Patricia then moved to the two-bedroom semi-detached property on Blenheim Close in Forest Town, Mansfield. Forest Town is a former mining village that lies to the east of Mansfield, roughly 20 miles away from Sheffield and over 150 miles away from Susan's flat in London. Blenheim Close sits on an estate of family homes, both semi-detached and detached, with a number of bungalows dotted between. The village itself had a small shop, post office and a little church. It was a quiet, unassuming area, ideal for a reclusive couple like Patricia and William. The Wycherleys kept to themselves. They would be pleasant if you spoke to them, but didn't actively get involved in the community. Neighbours described how they would see the couple walk into town. Patricia always wore a green coat and would dutifully walk behind her husband. She was quiet and didn't venture out without him. Neighbours remarked on them being an old-fashioned couple. He was the master of the house, undertaking all maintenance and other manly jobs, while Patricia would do the laundry, cook the meals and clean. William took great pride in ensuring that the garden was well presented, and he was often outside tending to it, using a manual lawnmower or trimming the hedge with a pair of scissors. Any offers from neighbours to help him with more modern equipment was politely declined. Neighbours noted that William enjoyed listening to music. He also played the organ, preferring to perform mainly music hall songs. On one occasion, a neighbour visited the house to complain about the volume of the organ. This neighbour had a glimpse inside the property and noted that the walls and net curtains were stained yellow from the couple's smoking habit. In 1998, the neighbours whose house looks onto the Wycherleys' back garden noticed something suspicious at the house. Curious, the neighbour went to investigate. Peering over the garden fence, he noticed the patio door was open, and a shadowy figure was moving about inside, much too nimble to be either of the elderly Wycherleys. Initially he wondered if it was a burglary in progress, But as he turned to go back to the house, a voice greeted him, and over the garden fence a man introduced himself as Christopher Edwards, the Wycherley's son-in-law. He pleasantly explained that Mr. and Mrs. Wycherley had moved to Morecambe on the west coast of England to spend their retirement by the sea. They were looking forward to relaxing and enjoying the sea air. Christopher explained that he and Susan had agreed they would travel up from London to keep an eye on their house for them until they decided what to do with it. At least once a month, Christopher and Susan were seen at the property. Christopher cared for the garden, but William had so meticulously looked after over the years. He would make trips to the local shop and post office to pay the bills. He was usually smartly dressed and happy to stop and chat about his in-laws and how much they were enjoying their retirement. Susan, on the other hand, was as reclusive as her parents. Rarely seen, and when she did venture out in public, it was always with Christopher. She would walk a few steps behind him with her head bowed and her hands tucked in her pockets. She did not make eye contact and allowed her husband to speak on her behalf. One afternoon in 2005, the peaceful estate was disturbed by a loud bang. People rushed to see what had happened. The Wycherley's garden fence was broken and splintered, debris strewn across the lawn, and a car rested in the flower bed. It was discovered that a lady who lived up the hill from the house had accidentally forgotten to apply her handbrake, leading to her car rolling down the hill, smashing through the fence and tearing up the lawn. Within a couple of days, Christopher had the fence repaired, and not long after that, a for sale sign went up. It didn't take long for the property to sell. It was purchased by a landlord who, after renovations, subsequently rented the property in 2006 to a mother and her daughter, and life on the quiet village street continued as normal. In 2012, Christopher and Susan decided to leave their rented flat in London and move to the city of Lille in northern France. It's an attractive and vibrant city, ideally situated with easy access to Paris, Brussels and London via train. On the 1st of October 2013, Christopher Edwards called his stepmother Elizabeth. Despite being in France for a year, he was struggling to find a job and they were running out of money. He was desperate and asked her for a loan to help them get back on their feet. As much as Elizabeth wanted to help, she couldn't. But when she told Christopher this, he went on to tell his 80-year-old stepmother that his wife had killed before. She wasn't going to be threatened by her son and daughter-in-law and went to the police to report the call. Police began to look into the claims that a murder had been committed. Apparently, Susan had killed her mother after an argument. The investigation began by looking for proof of life. They sought any evidence of activity that showed that Patricia was still alive. Records showed that the Wycherleys sold their house at Blenheim Close in 2005, and documents signed by them corroborated this. The police tried to trace the elusive couple. They spoke to neighbours who stated that the couple had moved in 1998. The accounts of where they had gone differed. Some neighbours said it was to Brighton on the south coast, and others claimed it was to the northwest town of Morecambe. They all agreed it was somewhere by the sea, as Christopher Edwards had often stated that despite his father-in-law being in his late 90s, he still enjoyed a stroll along the seafront. They also were able to contact family members who advised that they rarely spoke to the couple and hadn't physically seen them in many years. They reported that the couple kept to themselves and weren't ones to attend family gatherings. William even failed to turn up to his own mother's funeral in 2009. The family were able to produce Christmas cards and letters that they had received over the years from Patricia. The letters advised that the couple had been travelling in Ireland and were enjoying good health and happiness in their golden years. Police attempted to track down Patricia and William in Ireland and the UK. They were unable to identify where the couple had been staying. No records of them renting properties or booking hotel rooms could be found. Nor was there any financial evidence that the couple had been living anywhere else except Blenheim Close. There hadn't been any missing person reports filed in Ireland or the UK, and no death certificates had been issued. The police also considered the John and Jane Doe records, despite the task being made difficult by the fact that they only had 2 photographs of William, one of him as a young man, and the other more recent photo of him with his silver hair, blue eyes, and an upright posture. They were unable to find a single image of Patricia, so medical records were used as comparison against the John and Jane Doe records. However, they were unable to identify any matches. Through the medical records, the police were able to track the couple's health. It transpired that neither William nor Patricia had attended the doctors they were registered at since 1998. Nor had they re-registered with another doctor. Their records did reveal that letters were sent to excuse the couple from routine appointments. The police grew increasingly concerned that no one had physically seen or spoken to the couple. All communication had been via letter. They were starting to wonder if Christopher Edwards' statement with his stepmother had been true. Looking into the Wycherley's finances, it was clear they had still been receiving their pensions and benefits up until 2012. This coincided with William's 100th birthday, and as such, he was required to attend a face-to-face meeting in order to have his benefits reassessed. When the attempts to contact William by the Department of Work and Pensions failed, and he did not attend his appointment, his benefits were stopped. 77-year-old Patricia's benefits were still being paid, but police were concerned that the recorded home address that the Department of Work and Pensions had was the house on Blenheim Close. Suspicions grew further as the police delved deeper. They went back to the estate agents who conducted the house sale, who revealed that all correspondence with the Wycherleys had been via letter. They never met them in person, nor did they speak to them on the phone. The financial records were also telling a story. In 1998, the couple's bank account had been closed on Tuesday the 5th of May, just after the May bank holiday, and the combined balance of £45,000 was transferred into another account, and this money was then withdrawn. Had William and Patricia withdrawn the money themselves and gone to start a life somewhere else? The police did not believe that. The couple seemed to disappear in 1998 with no forwarding addresses, no financial trail, and the fact that no one had physically seen or spoken to the couple led investigators to conclude that something had happened to them. After moving into the house on Blenheim Close, for 7 years, Sue and her daughter had happily enjoyed their home. It was in a peaceful area and the house was a perfect size for the two of them. The garden was an ideal sun trap for sunbathing. However, in October 2013, this tranquility was disturbed. Sue answered a knock at the door. A police officer stood before her, and what he was about to tell her would shock her to the core and make her change how she saw her perfect property. The officer advised that they were investigating the disappearance of a previous owner of the property, and they wished to conduct a search of the house and gardens. Reluctantly, Sue agreed to allow the search, and while she and her daughter stayed with relatives, police began their investigation. The neighbourhood was warned of the planned investigation and advised residents not to advertise the police presence on social media, as this could have a negative impact on the case. Police forensic vehicles arrived outside the house. The recognisable blue tent was erected and teams in protective clothing were seen entering the property. They did a thorough search of the house for any forensic evidence. They pulled up carpets, removed skirting boards, in search for any clues that something untoward had occurred. The investigation then proceeded to the garden at the rear of the house. Using ground-penetrating radar, they scanned every inch of the garden and found nothing. So they decided to try another method, a less high-tech and more furry method. They brought in cadaver dogs. A cadaver dog can detect human remains through concrete buried underground or submerged in a body of water. Their sensitive little noses can smell the chemicals emitted from a decomposing body to the depth of 15 feet below the ground. A study by researchers at Alabama University conducted an experiment in 2012. 4 dogs were tested. They were sent to find a single human vertebrae buried 2 feet below the ground in a 300 by 150 square foot area. Despite the vertebrae being over 30 years old, the dogs were able to locate its position. Nottinghamshire police hoped their cadaver dogs could do the same. 2 dogs were brought into the area separately. One spot was identified by both canines. The dogs had indicated that something was decomposing under the patio. The flagstones were pulled up and a digger began to slowly scrape away the layers of soil until something emerged from the cold earth. Roughly 90 centimetres down and 110 centimetres wide, they came across a hole filled with a bundle of material, which when examined was found to be 2 duvets. Within the folds, they discovered 2 badly decomposed bodies. When Sue returned to her home, the damage to the property had been repaired and the garden returned to its original state. All evidence of the investigation had been removed. They then told her they had recovered 2 bodies from beneath the patio. Sue was naturally horrified. She told police that they had laid the patio because nothing seemed to grow in that area. Her horror was intensified by the knowledge that her nephew and daughter had been digging in the soil, burying their toys in the dirt just above where the corpses lay. Fortunately for the police, despite the bodies being in the ground for at least 15 years, the duvet covers preserved a lot of key evidence. They identified one body as being that of a woman in her 60s. Her cause of death was determined as being 2 gunshot wounds. 1 bullet was still lodged in her spine. Unable to track down family for DNA comparison, the deceased woman was identified as Mrs. Wycherley through medical records. William Wycherley had also been shot twice at point-blank range by the same .38 caliber weapon that had killed his wife. He was identified through familial DNA. The murder weapon was thought to be a .38 caliber World War II revolver, which was never located. Police now had a confession, bodies, but had not yet apprehended Susan Edwards. She was in the city of Lille in France. Officers began the process of requesting a European arrest warrant, but the request was never filed. In a strange and unexpected twist in the case, the lead detective, DCI Griffin, received an email titled Surrender. Christopher Edwards had sent what Griffin described as, quote, an extremely polite email in which she was advised that both Christopher and Susan were willing to return to England and hand themselves in. A date and time was agreed with the couple, but the investigators were sceptical that they would actually see the Edwards as the train pulled into St Pancras station in London. British Transport Police watched the passengers alight. They observed Christopher and Susan exit the train with a solitary suitcase. They proceeded to approach the waiting officers and willingly handed themselves in. From the train station, they were then taken 127 miles away to the police station in Nottingham for questioning. Susan and Christopher Edwards were taken to separate interview rooms and the investigators listened as the couple told their version of what had happened to Patricia and William Wycherley. Susan described how she had gone to visit her parents for the Maybank holiday weekend in 1998. It had been a normal, uneventful visit. This all changed in the early hours of Sunday morning, when she was awoken by her parents arguing. They were screaming obscenities at each other before a loud bang pierced the air, followed by silence. Entering her parents' bedroom, Susan observed her mother, Dressed in her nightgown, she was standing over William's lifeless body, with a gun in her hand. The 63-year-old stared coldly at her daughter as she threw the gun onto the bed. In shock, Susan asked what her mother had done. But this seemed to anger Patricia. In a drunken state, Patricia began to belittle Susan, telling her that she was an unwanted pregnancy, that she never loved her. She continued by saying she knew about the perverted things William had done to her when she was a little girl. She knew her husband had been sneaking into Susan's room and molesting her at night. Susan told police that her father had sexually abused her between the time she was 8 till the age of 11, but she'd always believed that her mother didn't know. So to learn that she knew all along filled her with rage, and she felt betrayed. She couldn't understand why her own mother had done nothing to stop the abuse, why she failed to protect her child. Her statement continued. Susan claimed that as her mother persisted to berate her daughter, she began to talk about Christopher and an encounter she had with him in 1992, telling Susan that he isn't the faithful husband he pretends to be. He would even sleep with your own mother behind your back. Patricia's vile words cut deep, and Susan said she just snapped. She grabbed the gun in a flash of anger and fired. Her mother fell to the floor and her poisonous words stopped. She told the interviewer that guns terrified her, and it was the first time she had ever held one in her hands. Leaving her parents' bodies where they lay, Susan wrapped the gun in a pillowcase, which she concealed in her bag. She then left the house and headed into Mansfield town centre. She walked the streets for a while, taking in the night air, pondering what to do next. As she passed an alleyway, she saw some large waste bins behind a row of shops, in which she had disposed of the murder weapon. Susan then claimed that she located a payphone from where she called Christopher, but she did not tell him what had happened. She rang him to say that she missed him and bid him good night. She subsequently arrived back at her parents' house, removed the duvets off the bed and proceeded to wrap the bodies in them, for single-handedly concealing the corpses under the bed. Susan remained at the house, returning home on Tuesday the 5th of May. She spent 2 days in the house where her parents lay dead, sleeping in the room next to their bedroom, making meals in their kitchen, and washing in the bathroom while her parents' bodies began to decay. When Christopher arrived home from work on the Tuesday, Susan had his tea waiting for him. She sat beside him on the sofa. She questioned whether to tell her husband what she had done, wondering how to explain what had happened. But instead, she told him that her parents were going away to Blackpool for the weekend. They had asked her to look after the house for them and she had agreed, but she didn't want to be in the house alone and thought they could go together. On the Friday, the Edwards drove the 150 miles from their flat in Dagenham to the home on Blenheim Close. After the 3-hour drive, they bought fish and chips for their evening meal and settled down to watch the live broadcast of the Eurovision Song Contest, with 2 bodies rotting away in the bedroom upstairs. After finishing their meal, Susan tidied away the plates and returned to sit with Christopher. While the Eurovision entrants sang, she confessed that her parents were dead in the room above where they were sat. They then continued to watch the Eurovision Song Contest, witnessing the crowning of the winner, Dana International from Israel. It was now 2 a.m. and under the cover of darkness, the couple stripped down to their underwear. Christopher and Susan set about burying the bodies in the garden. She described how she struggled to lift the bodies as they carried them downstairs and out through the patio doors. Susan recalled that her parents' corpses were stiff as they manipulated them into the fetal position to ensure they fit in the hole that Christopher had dug. They placed them on top of each other and began to fill in the grave. A witness would later testify that he saw Christopher standing in the hole in the garden, but soon the area was landscaped and a new flower bed had been created. The same flower bed that the car had crashed into in 2005. The police were stunned by how cold and detailed Susan's account was. Throughout the telling of it, she showed no emotions, nor did she appear remorseful. The other officers who interviewed Christopher noticed that he too seemed unfazed by what had occurred, and when they compared the couple's statements, they matched word for word. The police had doubts regarding how truthful the Edwards were being, and questioned if the evidence matched with their version of events. The pathologist and a number of police officers argued that a body left in a locked property for a week would emit an overwhelming smell that would trigger the gag reflex. So why, when they entered the house on the Friday after the murders and sat enjoying their fish and chips, did Christopher not smell the distinct odour of death? An entomologist, Dr. Martin Hall from the National History Museum, a scientist who studies insects, reported that there was an absence of any evidence of blowflies. These are the first insects to colonise a dead body in the earliest stages of decomposition. They will lay their eggs within 1 to 3 hours after death. So if the Wycherleys had been dead for a week, there would have been signs of insect activity, suggesting that they were buried shortly after they were killed. This claim was backed by the pathologist, who noted the couple's claim that the bodies were stiff when they were buried. However, this suggested the bodies were in rigor mortis, which would not present 5 days later. A ballistics expert concluded that William and Patricia had been shot in an almost identical manner by the same individual who was skilled in the use of firearms. Remember, Susan claimed she had never held a gun before. She openly admitted they terrified her. However, it transpired that Christopher used to possess a gun licence, was a keen shooter and had an extensive gun collection, which led police to doubt that Susan was the one who actually shot her parents. The financial records also provided damning evidence against the couple. On Tuesday the 5th of May 1998, Susan walked into the Halifax bank and closed her parents' accounts. She then opened a joint account in hers and her mother's name, this just 2 days after they had died. Susan then proceeded to withdraw £45,000. Couple's deceitfulness for financial gain was mapped out by the financial records. They applied for credit cards and loans in the Wycherley's name, continued to claim the couple's pensions and benefits, and sold the house on Blenheim Close by forging the documents. For nearly 15 years, Susan had been writing letters to her family members, pretending to be her parents, spinning wonderful stories about their travels in Ireland and the amazing things they had been experiencing. She even sent Christmas cards and birthday cards as part of their elaborate ruse. It's hard to believe that for 15 years, the couple successfully got away with their crime. No one suspected anything. It was only when the Department of Work and Pensions contacted William regarding his 100th birthday that the couple panicked. Unless they could prove William was still alive and well, his benefits would be stopped. They realised that there was no way to continue the elaborate charade in order to claim William's £800 a month. In fears of being caught for their fraudulent activity, Christopher proceeded to steal £10,000 from his workplace in London. The couple abandoned their flat, left all their belongings and fled to Lille in France in 2012. They chose this because it is close to the Belgian border, where the actor Gerard Depardieu was residing. Susan had been sending and receiving letters from the actor for the last 14 years and suggested he may be able to help them. This fanciful claim would also be exposed as an elaborate and detailed lie. They were able to live for a year in France, surviving on the cash they had taken with them. But they found they were unable to access their bank accounts in England, and despite trying to find employment, Christopher failed. The couple saw no other way out of their desperate situation, and when Elizabeth Edwards refused to loan them money, which would have helped keep them out of jail, the couple decided all they could do was hand themselves in. The one solitary suitcase they had when they were apprehended at St. Pancras was all that they possessed. Despite stealing an estimated £250,000, the couple were in fact homeless and in severe debt. When police opened the suitcase, they were amazed by what they found. No clothing, not even a toothbrush. All that was inside were signed photographs of film actors, hundreds of images with verification certificates. It came to light that the couple collected movie and war memorabilia. They had purchased thousands of pounds worth of them. They had become so obsessed with building their collection, all the money went into these purchases, which explained to the police why the couple lived such a modest and frugal lifestyle. The memorabilia was declared as Susan's assets, which were sold through the Proceeds of Crime Act. The collection fetched just £3,000, and Christopher's assets were valued at a minuscule £17. Once all the evidence was considered, investigators believed that Patricia and William Wycherley had been murdered over the Maybank holiday weekend. It was Christopher who pulled the trigger, as the manner in which they were shot was too similar, and he, unlike Susan, was skilled with a gun. They also highlighted Susan's claim that she had single-handedly moved her parents' bodies, but then struggled to move them with her husband. They believed that she never concealed the bodies, and they were buried not long after they were murdered. The motives for the murders was purely for financial gain. Police pointed to the fact that within 2 days of the murders, Susan went to the bank, which was a calculated move. The police believed that the Edwards had planned the deaths for some time, driven by greed and resentment. Susan felt cheated out of her £10,000 inheritance from her step-grandmother. She was angry that her parents got £25,000 from the sale of the Edgware property, and she didn't get a penny of the proceeds. At the trial, the couple admitted to the charges of fraud and theft. However, they refused to admit to the murders. They rigidly stuck to their well-rehearsed stories that Patricia had killed William, and then Susan had shot her mother in self-defence. They hoped this would be deemed as manslaughter, but the forensic evidence suggested premeditated murder. Susan was described as a fantasist. She'd been holed up in a house without any other companion other than Christopher. She was filled with a growing resentment for her parents that began when her dad started to abuse her. This claim was verified by independent witnesses at trial. However, the judge stated that this may have been the root of her hatred towards her father, but the murder of her parents was purely for financial gain. It was determined that by 1998, Christopher and Susan Edwards had amassed a large collection of memorabilia, but this also led them to sink deeper into debt, with their spending spiralling out of control and bills going unpaid. They saw a deadly solution. They resolved to take back the money Susan believed was rightfully hers. For 15 years, they were able to persuade everyone that knew the Wycherleys that they were still alive, providing explanations for their absence. This was aided by the elderly couple's desire to isolate themselves from the world, a desire the Edwards used to their advantage. Christopher and Susan could have easily gotten away with murder, had it not been for the letter regarding William's 100th birthday, which resulted in their downfall. It is hard to comprehend how two people can go missing and nobody notice. At least in this case, family members provided a plausible explanation for the Wycherleys' sudden disappearance. But this is not true in all cases. The Wycherleys' story reminded me of the case of Joyce Vincent, who died of natural causes in December 2003, but her body lay undiscovered in her flat for 2 whole years. Her story is a tragic tale. She was 38 when she died. People who had known her describe her as beautiful, intelligent, active, and very sociable. But things changed when she met a partner. The flat where she resided had been provided for her as she had been a victim of domestic violence. In 2001, Joyce began to cut all ties with the outside world. She quit her job and distanced herself from her friends and family. It is believed that she wrongly felt ashamed for allowing herself to be abused by her partner. She cut herself off completely. leaving her family unaware of her situation. Despite her living in a block of flats, all the warning signs were missed. The odour emitted from her body was written off as rubbish in the communal dustbin. Due to the lack of anyone being seen coming and going from the property, neighbours believed that it was unoccupied, and as it wasn't on the ground floor, there was no means for her to be spotted through the window. When her body was discovered by bailiffs, they found just skeletal remains, lying beside a shopping bag of undelivered Christmas presents, and the television was still playing. The flats were owned by a housing association, but because Joyce's rent was part paid by benefits and her utility bills were set up to be paid by direct debits, it was only when her bank account was empty that the arrears began to mount up. One of the most tragic aspects is that her family tried to track her down. They had hired a private detective who was able to locate her address, and the family wrote her letters but received no response. They thought she was intentionally ignoring them. It was only when she was found that they learned the truth. She had died before the first letter had been written. It is scary how easily Joyce Vincent and the Wycherleys disappeared off the radar, all three of them victims of someone else's actions. Susan and Christopher Edwards were sentenced to life with the chance of parole in 25 years. The judge stated, quote, "You are in your late 50s. You are going to spend most, if not all, of the rest of your lives in prison." As for Sue and her daughter, the tenants who lived at the Wycherleys' former home where their remains were found, well, they're still living in the property. On the day the Edwards were sentenced, Sue spoke to the reporters. She proudly stated, "I love our house. We've got a great garden. We've had a lot of happy times there. I lived here all this time, and the Wycherleys have not done me harm. They're not going to do me any harm now." I'm glad that Sue and her daughter were not scared off by the gruesome find in their garden. I'm not sure how I would react to such a discovery. I'd be interested to know if you have been in Sue's position and how you felt or would feel if it had happened to you. You can get in touch on the It's Murder Up North Facebook page or on Twitter. I'd love to hear your stories. And don't forget, you can now support It's Murder Up North on Patreon. So please feel free to sign up and start helping the show grow. Episode 12 will be available next Sunday. So in the meantime, keep an eye on those shadows.